Hello, Varlets. Today, I want to bring you through the updated version of my Stormwitch Psyker build. This video will be done in the commentary format, similar to the last video, which I am very grateful for all the positive feedback. That was a real infusion of confidence and motivation, and I'm really excited to try experimenting with this format more. Now, for this video, it will be split into 3 parts, the first being the talent showcase. This is then followed by the weapon showcase over here. And finally, I will add in some small tips and general advice on how to use this build effectively. As for the talent part, I'm going to do it a little differently from what you might be used to watching. Instead of just showing you a full build with everything already selected and just generally saying out loud what each of the talents are, I'm going to actually build it with you. Now, I'm doing this mainly for the benefit of new players or people who are not very familiar with Psykers yet, so that I can use this opportunity to explain the rationale and logic for taking up certain talents and how they interact with each other. I think that would make this guide a bit more educational than it otherwise might be. But if you are someone who is already a veteran in Psyker and know all the talents by heart, feel free to click on this timestamp, which I will put here, to jump straight to screenshots of the full build. For now, let's just proceed to the talent tree. And what we have here is a blank talent slate on my Stormwitch, which is selected right here. And we're going to kick off this build by taking Quietude. This is a very fundamental perk for toughness regeneration for Psykers. It's always good no matter the build, as long as you are using Peril. We are then going to branch over to the right, picking up both Metal and Perfect Timing. This build is very crit-centric, and as a result, you will be aiming to get as many critical hits as possible, and so Metal will give you extra toughness regeneration whenever you score a critical hit. And when you do score a critical hit, you will gain extra warp damage from Perfect Timing. From here, we will be going down to Smite, following the theme of lightning in this build. Smite will be used for emergencies, such as if we are overwhelmed by Poxwalkers, by Crushers, Maulers, and generally to help your teammates get out of sticky situations or to assist in a revive. Following that, we will also take Lightning Storm to aid in our crowd control ability for Smite. And then we're going to move down to Psykinetics Aura. This talent is one of the best talents in the game, arguably. It does 2 things. First off, it decreases the ability cooldown for both you and your allies' incoherency, and it's not even an aura, it's just a regular talent node. Secondly, it kind of scales with difficulty. Because the higher up in difficulty you go, the more elites and specialists you encounter, the more often you're going to get your abilities back. So this is a wonderful talent to take if you can swing it. Next, we're going to move down into Psykinetics Presence. Plus 7.5% damage against elite enemies for you and your allies' incoherency. You might be wondering, is 7.5% a lot of damage? Well, if I recontextualize it into it being almost a tier 3 elite damage perk, then that's not bad. In fact, that's quite good. So think of this aura as giving your teammates a tier 3 elite damage perk for free for all of their attacks. It's a really good perk. Then we're going to move over to the left here to pick up Perilous Assault. For the only reason why we're going to do this is because we want Empiric Shock. Empiric Shock allows you to apply a debuff onto enemies that increases the amount of damage they take from warp attacks by up to 30%. This is a very powerful spike for all Psyker builds, and honestly, if I'm playing anything to do with staffs or casting spells, so not Gun Psyker, I'm going to try and take Empiric Shock wherever I can. I'll demonstrate to you just how powerful this node actually is. From here, we are going to go down into one with the Warp. This is one of the few toughness damage reduction nodes that we get as a Psyker, and it scales with our Peril. What this means is that as we trade damage, especially with range enemies, we start building up Peril, we become much more resilient to their attacks, and that allows us to trade more. And once we've done trading and sustained enough toughness damage, we can then Quell to regenerate all the toughness we lost with Quietude. From here, we will take Telkine Shield as our main alt or ability of choice, and then we will also pick up Telkine Dome and Sanctuary. This choice is very critical to this build, because although you are very strong in crowd control, having both Smite and using the Surge Staff, and you will die very quickly if not protected. If you are using this build right, Telkine Shield should be placed down a lot and very frequently to both protect yourself from even what seemingly might be a very small threat, but to also keep your allies safe as well. From here, we will pick up this Peril Resistance node and pick up Solidity and Empiric Resolve. These 2 nodes work together to increase our sustained damage output by first reducing the downtime from quelling and increasing the uptime of casting by making it cheaper. So these two nodes are incredibly powerful, especially when you pair it with Empiric Shock. We will also branch to the right from this Peril Resistance node and pick up Warp Rider. This, similar to one with the Warp, will scale as our peril increases and allows us to deal even more damage, which, if we maintain a high level of peril, is a huge damage boost to our output. At this point, we have 7 talent points left. I am now going to branch out from here to take the Critical Chance node. This is because this particular build is very critical reliant, so anytime we can get a boost to our Critical Chance cheaply, in this case it just cost me 1 node to get 5%, we should take it. Now, I have did experiment with different nodes, such as taking Channeled Force for the increased damage output for our primary attacks, but the net result is that having more crit chance benefited this build over the longer term, and you'll see why in a moment. So, we now have 6 points remaining, and this is where the build now splits into 2 different builds. The first build is my preferred build. It is one that is more focused on single target damage and has much more uptime for Taukain Shield and therefore is more defensive. The second build is more independent in that it allows you to stand on your own 2 feet without having to depend on teammates much. The first one is going to be the path of Warp Siphon. We will pick up Warp Siphon for the ability to reduce our Taukain Shield's cooldown. We will go down the path of Empyrean Empowerment to increase our damage, and take up Warp Battery to increase the total number of charges we can carry. Then, we will also take Psychic Vampire. This is so that in events where we are dealing with large hordes or a bunch of shooters when you have no warp charges, your teammates' kills can help contribute to your warp charge build-up, which will benefit you passively. Finally, with our last point, we will take Inner Tranquility for the additional peril resistance. So in total, this whole keystone at full charges of 6, we will get a 45% reduction to our Taukain shields. That means that's basically half the cooldown gone just from casting it. We will get a 24% damage boost to all our weapons. That includes our melee, that includes our 4 staffs primary and secondary, and also smite. And we will have an additional 36% peril generation reduction. So that again synchronizes with Solidity and Empiric Resolve for further sustained damage output. This build is my favorite because it does all the things I want this build to do effectively without branching too much and being too generalist. It is very much still focused on single target elite destruction as well as keeping your teammates alive, and doesn't handle hordes too well, but that's what your teammates are for. The second build involves stripping away Warp Siphon, so refund back the 6 points you got from this entire tree, including the modifier up here, and we're going to put them into Empowered Psionics. We are going to take Empowered Psionics for the increased damage for our smite. We will take Overpowering Souls to guarantee our Empowered Psionics charges from killing elites, and we will take Charged Up to hold 3 of them so that we have a lot of flexibility when it comes to using smite. The next 2 points will go into Battle Meditation. This is a very critical node that you should take because it helps with the uptime of smite, and we will take Enfeebled to further boost the damage of smite since we're using it as an offensive tool. This build's benefit is that it is an all-rounder in terms of offense in exchange for your defensive ability. Because you no longer have the cooldown from Warp Siphon, your Taukain Shield is more valuable now in that you can't afford to use it willy-nilly as and when. Whereas this, you could use this like 2-3 times in a single encounter, which was very beneficial for keeping you and your team alive. The Empowered Psionics build with Smite allows you to clear a room on your own. The limitations of what you can kill with Smite on your own is anything that is not tougher than a Rager. So if you're dealing with, say, 20 Ragers, you have no problems. Anything tougher than that, and you will run out of time to Smite. So if you see a whole bunch of Crushers, Maulers, Bulwarks, then you can keep them CC'd and deal considerable damage, but it's not enough to kill them on its own. You will need to either recast it again, which is fine since you have charged up, or you need teammates to come and follow up. But otherwise, this is also a very strong build for people who like independence, so to speak, where you don't want to depend on your teammates for clearing hordes and poxwalkers and a whole bunch of shooters, etc. But for the remainder of this build guide, I'm going to focus solely on my Warp Charge one because that is the most fun build I find. The ability to keep your team alive is so valuable, especially in the higher levels of play. So let's put all the Warp Charges back. And one more point, where did I go? Oh, right here, Warp Rider. That was it for our talent selection. Hopefully you found that build explanation educational, I hope. This is at this point is where I would put the timestamp for the screenshots of both the builds, so that the people who are used to building psykers will just find it immediately. Now, let's move on to our loadout, where we look at the star of the show, the Electrokinetic Force Staff, formerly known as the Surge Staff. This staff is, of course, going to be on theme with the Storm Witch, but it's also probably one of the most powerful staffs in this current sandbox, thanks to the talent update as well as the inclusion of Surge. Previously, we didn't have this. Previously, the Surge staff didn't have the Surge blessing, which was ironic. Surge can only work on your primary attacks for the Surge staff. It does not work on the chain lightning attack. As far as secondary attacks go, only the Void Strike staff gets the benefit of Surge. But for this, our primary attacks along with Empiric Shock is so strong that it is worth bringing it along for this build. Now, let's get on to building it. First off, in terms of stats, the only dumb stat is probably going to be Quell Speed. So you want everything here to be as high as possible, with this being, I guess it would be 60 if everything else here is 80. And this is fine for 60 because we have Solidity to compensate for the lower Quell Speed. For our perks, we want 25% damage against Carapace because that is the only enemy, apart from unyielding bosses, that will cause us a little bit of trouble in our regular gameplay. For blessings, I'm going to skip over this one for a moment. For blessings, we will want Surge because we are going to be using our primary attacks a lot since we have we have Empiric Shock to use, and it gives us an extra 5% critical chance for the Surge staff. We are also going to pick up Warp Nexus for additional critical chance as our peril level increases. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the Surge staff, I'm just going to keep calling it Surge staff because I'm old that way. This staff is very reliant on critical hits. Let me just show you the stats. Nope, the stats here. Okay, secondary, this is your chain lightning attack. This staff's chain lightning attack cannot hit weak spots. So this entire row of damage numbers is irrelevant to it, as is this one. So you can either only deal body shots or get critical strikes. The critical strike bonus depends on the armor you're hitting. So if you're hitting anything that isn't Flag or Carapace, a critical strike represents a 60% damage increase. If you're hitting Flag or Carapace, that's 30%. And so a 60% jump is a pretty sizable jump and is worth investing to, especially for a weapon that doesn't need to aim. And that's why our choice here is critical chance. I have experimented with plus elite damage or plus unyielding, and although the benefits are great, critical chance is just more useful because it affects both your Surge chance, which doubles the damage for your primary attacks, which is pretty substantial, and it makes your chain lightning attacks much more reliable as well because the damage spike is very strong. I'll show you in the later part of the video about just how powerful building into crit is worth it instead of, say, diversifying into unyielding for extra boss damage or elite damage for more general purpose use. Next, let's take a look at our melee weapon, and in line with the theme of this build, being the Storm Witch, I have chosen the Shock Maul simply because it is lightning. That's it. That's the only reason why I chose this. You, however, are free to use whatever melee weapon you like. You want to use a dueling sword to deal with mutants and crushers? Go ahead. You want to use a force sword? That's also fine. Any weapon that allows you to deal with mutants or small groups of melee enemies will work perfectly fine. In this case, the Shock Maul is not very good with mutants, but very good against poxwalkers and groups of melee enemies. So, now that we have our weapons sorted out, let's briefly go over curios. For my personal choice, I have chosen a mix of stamina, toughness, and health. I think generally, if you go any class that goes with all three together, can't really go wrong because you always use stamina, you will always use toughness, and more health is almost never bad. For the perks below, I've gone for all toughness and all stamina regeneration. So that means I have 3 toughness and 3 stamina regeneration. I've gone for 1 sprint efficiency because you sprint, so that's useful, and 2 points into, 2 nodes of corruption resistance for a total of 30%. The reason why I go for corruption resistance is because Telkine Shield cannot protect you from Pox gas. So if a Pox bomber decides to lob one on you, you are going to take damage even though you're inside the shield because the gas seeps through. And this build, squishy as it is already, really cannot afford to lose that much health from a corruption. But that's just me. You go ahead to feel free to take whatever you like in place of corruption resistance. Or sprint speed will also never be bad, so that's something you can look forward to. Or you could take gunner resistance, which used to be the go-to default perk because gunners would shred your toughness like nothing. But since we have Telkine Shield, that will do the tanking for us. And so with that, that is our weapon selections and the reasons for picking up the weapons as we do. Now we're going to move into some general tips and suggestions. There isn't really too much to talk about. This build is very simple in its usage. There's no complicated mechanics unlike the Cinder Mage build where there were interesting interactions. But rather, there are certain combinations of attacks that you can use to maximize the effectiveness of this build. First, let me go build up some warp charges. Alright, now that I have 6 stacks of warp charges, the warp siphon path for this build is now at full potential. First, I'm going to show you the difference between using secondaries and primary attacks. So here we have a Mauler that will die in 3-4 hits. So the nature of this build is that because it depends on critical chance, there's always going to be variability with your breakpoints. But that was about 4, let's say 3 hits to kill a Mauler if the last one crit. And on this one, if we are lucky, it dies pretty quick. Considering that this is your primary attack, that's not bad. But this is where things start to get crazy. The more peril you get, the more crits you start to proc, the faster this will start killing Maulers than the secondary can, because it is not restricted by charge time. And I'm not using any tricks like Quell cancelling here. I don't really like using Quell cancelling because it feels very unnatural. That was a 3 hit, by the way, on the Mauler because I crit twice. See how fast you can bring a Mauler down with just your primary attacks. So if you have to deal with a bunch of Maulers, just holding down on the button and just spamming your void bolts at them will bring them down fairly quickly without having to worry too much about building up too much peril, because each cast is like 1 to 2 peril thanks to Warp Siphon. The next thing I want to show you is how to deal with crushers. Summon a crusher here, execute it. So previously, without Empiric Shock, we would just full charge and electrocute it and hope for the best with a crit. So right now I'm really unlucky with absolutely no crits. That took us 4 hits. With a crit, it should bring us up to 3. That's 3 hits with a lot of peril, which means Warp Rider is doing its job. But if we start from scratch and we apply Empiric Shock first, we can potentially bring it down in 2. Almost, yeah. If I build up a bit more peril, we can definitely bring it down in 2. That's 2000 damage. Dead. With around 40% peril, you can quite reliably bring down crushers in 2 full charges. As long as you crit once. Easy. And the more peril you get, the easier it becomes. Simple as. This is why we are building for the primary attack and building high into crit, because the critical damage makes such a big difference in this build. The last thing I want to share has to do with mutants, and I was playing around in the Psychonium trying to figure out what to do with them, and I encountered a interesting combo that you should use. Well, not really combo, more like how to deal with mutants with the 4-star. So if you just let the mutant run and charge it once, it doesn't stun it, it just keeps going. What you need to do to stop a mutant is to actually hit it twice. And you can hit it twice without using full charge. As long as you hit it twice, it will stop. So let's wait for it. So as long as you keep chaining it at minimum charge, a mutant cannot charge you. And this is useful if you are busy over here and you need to stop a mutant. See? As long as it hits twice within a short duration, the mutant will stop. Which is helpful. Of course, you can just hope for the best and burst it down like that as well. But this is a, I guess, useful thing to know. It stunned earlier there because it was not yet in its charge animation. So once it starts getting into its charge animation, then you need to stun it twice. So yeah, that's all the tips I have for you for this build specifically. It's a bit longer than what I imagined it to be, but hopefully it was packed full of information that you can use and apply to your own gameplay. So yeah, that is the Storm Witch 2.0. This is a build I've been using since the beginning of the patch, and I've been playing almost nothing else except this build. And I've been enjoying it a lot. And I've been fine-tuning it a little bit as well along the way, which is why this video took a little longer to come out. But yeah, I hope you found this video useful. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Varlets.